Hello, Madeline. Good to see you again. How are you?
Yes, I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. How did your viewers or you enjoyed our last session?
Yeah, it's been great. I actually had a conversation with one of my clients who, yeah, it sparked her to get her saddle reevaluated when her horse was, struggling to maintain top line, and we had evaluated the ration, but we were still missing a piece of the puzzle. So yeah, that's always great to hear.
Good. That's good news. All right. So today we have a new topic. Do you mind just reading us the question?
Yeah, so we're going to be looking at body changes with pasture access.
Okay. So we can definitely um, see the difference when the green grass comes in. We
Yes.
don't control. We have all kinds of problems, which is your field. Maybe you can start us off. What happens if the horse comes from hay, boom, into pasture uncontrolled? So maybe you can start off with that, and then I add on what I see in the measurements of the horse when we fit saddles and the common problem.
Yeah, so I would say we have two different categories of issues that I see when we have pasture access being poorly managed, I would say. So, of course, we always want to start with introducing the horse to pasture slowly. That's important for their gastrointestinal health and the stability of the hindgut microbiome. But the main issues I see are either excess weight gain or weight loss. So, with weight gain, when you have a horse going from maybe an average or poorer quality hay onto lush pasture, we might see that horse gain too much weight. Tools like grazing muzzle or controlling the time of day that that animal is on pasture and length of time are all really great management tactics. However, the weight loss piece is something that I don't see talked about super frequently, but it's really common, especially in the geographical area I'm in. I'm in Ontario, Canada, where we are super excited to put our horses on pasture. It's the spring. We're finally out of winter. And so we put our horse out in the field, but the pasture quality isn't good enough to sustain the horses that are on it. So if you have pasture that is below about 4 to 6 inches in height, we'll say 6 inches, then the horse should be supplemented with hay. There's not enough forage in that paddock to maintain the horse on full time. So having overgrazed pasture, even though you think your horse is on pasture and they might be consuming enough calories, in reality, if the quality and health of the pasture isn't there, they're likely not. And so that's when I do see a lot of weight loss or muscle loss, especially in senior horses. It tends to be quite common. So those are a few things to think about when we're entering the spring and having body changes in regard to pasture.
So it's quite opposite what you think. You think, oh, great, I'm running low on hay. Great, I can let the horses out now, uncontrolled out, and let them graze, and they should go nice and fat. And the only thing I have to worry maybe is the too much sugar intake, and then they have all kinds of other problems. But it's quite the opposite, because there's not enough nutrition, especially where you say you are from, Ontario, Canada.
Mhm.
And at what stage do you see when the gaining starts?
Normally, I see the gaining starting if the pasture quality is adequate, so that 4 to 6 inches in length minimum, and the horse has been on the pasture for about 3 or more weeks. That's when I tend to see the weight gain really beginning to occur.
Yeah, so we can see that in relatively short time, the three-dimensional shape changes because we think as horse owners, oh, great, we can save hay, we throw him out, boom, the horse has lost weight. And when the horse loses weight, yes, you can see it in the girth circumference, but a three-dimensional shape changes. It's not just the girth. The actual area over the withers and the back muscle, we have that old saying, body fat disappears very slow. Muscles disappears very fast, and vice versa.
Mhm.
Muscle comes back very slow. Body fat comes back very fast. And that is kind of unfair, if you think about your own body or the horse's body. You train all winter long to put good muscles on your horse, and you're looking after the nutrition, and before you know, boom, it's gone.
Yeah.
And I was actually shocked. Not that I didn't trust the veterinarian who wrote a book about it, that after 4 weeks, you can actually see quite a bit of changes in the musculature, and you just confirmed it, that actually is what happens.
Mhm.
So I brought a little slideshow up here, and I thought I share that with you. So actually, I opened up the wrong slideshow, so give me a second. I will find it in a second. There it is. Yeah, so what changes actually in the body is the circumference, as I mentioned already, in the shoulder, but also it is the shoulder width and shoulder angle. And we might talked about that before, I'm not quite sure, but let me just come to this. So I refer riding very often to bodybuilding. When I do bodybuilding or weightlifting or weight training, I take artificial weight and I press it over my head, and I'm working my shoulder muscles, and my shoulder muscle needs to work more now, as if I wave to my children or stop a car for a taxi. So that's when I lift my weight. When do we really do that? Maybe when I get the glass out of the cupboard to drink a glass of water. So we don't do this regular for an hour, and for sure not with weight.
Yeah.
So when does the horse really lift the rib cage and looks around and gets her hind leg underneath? Maybe when he rears, when he fights another stallion, maybe when they get going and run away from the predator. So you can see the similarity. Okay? We do this very rare, but when I ride, I put weight on the horse's back. Kind of I put weight on my hands and I press the weight here. So now these muscles here, right here, these muscles often, this is the serratus, what connects the shoulder blade to the rib cage. I'm doing it baby language, very easy for everybody to understand. And there is a pectoralis muscle, often referred as the shoulder sling or the ring of muscles, whatever you want to call it. All I'm trying to say that the rib cage hangs off the front limb with these two different muscle groups. So if I'm sitting on, the serratus gets more trained, the pectoralis gets more trained, and so on and so forth. That changes the distance from here to here. We call that the tree width, which you see here in this little circle, right? So everything I put on for 4 months disappears in a month, 4 times faster than it comes. So that's the reality. Muscle disappear fast. So when the horse loses weight, it's not the fat what they lose, it's the muscle, right? Where we just talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then where the saddle sits, behind the shoulder blade, okay, these muscles do something else. This is the trapezius that helps the shoulder moves upwards, backwards. And this is the longissimus muscle that helps the horse to palpate forward. I'm going to come back to this in a minute. And you can see that changes this. So often people think the horse is gaining weight because before they had this withers, and now look, I put them on the pasture and it's all filled out and there's no more withers. All what really happened is the rib cage sat down. So what does that mean when the rib cage falls down? Either I do this with really shitty riding, or the horse is in pain, or the muscle gets lost.
Yeah.
So here's another picture. Natural, the horse's rib cage is up. Okay, that's what we call a natural position when the horse is not trained. When the horse is fit, the back goes up. So that is the simplest way I can explain it. If this would be the horse's skin, okay, so I make that the withers, and the highest point on the horse is the withers. Okay, so when the horse goes up, the angle change. If the rib cage goes down, the angle goes flatter. Can you see that, Melanie?
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes when the horse is in really bad shape, and goes down, we see signs like this: really bad necks, U-neck, and this line here. Okay, so this has a very bad situation. So when does it happen that the rib cage goes below natural shape? So let's go back to what we just talked about. The horse comes out, uncontrolled pasture. We think it's okay. We don't feed hay. Woof, the fitness goes to natural. So my saddle doesn't fit.
Yeah.
So when that angle changes, what actually happens? Now the tree acts like a stallion's bite. So what I mean with that is, over millions of years, stallion fight each other, and when they grab them by the neck, the stallion says, "You have the herd, I'm going." The same force of that stallion, a metal plate in your saddle can achieve. So when that saddle is not fitting anymore and it's pinching the trapezius muscle, we call this often as, "Oh, I think my saddle pinches the withers." It's not sitting on top, but we kind of have that gut feel it pinches the withers. Now the saddle does what the stallion does. So, and now comes the chain reaction. Here you see the line, what we call the cranial nerve 11. You see it here in an anatomy picture, and here you see it in reality outside. You see this line also when they're outside and they have a lot of flies, and typical in the spring, you have a lot of flies, and they're constantly shaking off the flies. This muscle often is referred as a fly shaker muscle. It does actually exist, and it's a term, fly shaker muscle. And, but when is it just because of shaking flight or because of the bite of the stallion? Because when they bite this here, in that where I mark it with green here, okay, in front of the withers, on top of the withers, or behind the withers, okay, that's where your saddle sits, that horse automatic drops their neck. Because that is the same thing when you lift up a little kitten, when you see the bear bring the cub baby to the den, they just hang there. They're immobilized, right? Why are they immobilized? When the rib cage drops, as we call them in pain, why are they in pain? This major nerve net we call brachial plexus. It's right there. So right there, that is between this joint here, the shoulder joint, and the shoulder and the scapular, sorry, upper arm and the scapular. So when the rib cage drops, that pinches this. And then this nerve goes all the way down. A great article by Dr. Ann Edmond made these drawings and explained why, when the horse's rib cage goes down, this horse is in pain. So as we know, we've seen many horses like this with U-neck, with these tight muscles. So we could say, so what? So what? I can train him out of this. It is hard if I now lose all my muscles and I use the same weight, but something really hurts. It's in pain. I'm not going to go up there. So it's a vicious cycle. So what am I going to do now? I'm going to take my lighter weight. So does that mean I can't ride my horse anymore? Or does it mean I maybe want to consider the saddle fitting if the horse changes, so it doesn't get to the stage where the horse comes down? So what I'm hearing is maybe I should stop riding while he gets skinny and then he gets fat. So when he is fat again, my saddle fits again. Well, one more time. Horses lose faster muscle than fat. So what they're losing is muscle, and they keep losing it. And what they're gaining then is fat. And when you're really in bad luck and there's too much sugar in the grass and too rich, and you get them out there, you have all other problems, which probably you know more than I do. Madeline, do you want to tell a little bit what could happen to a horse?
Yes. So when we have overconditioning and the horse becomes overweight or obese, they're at a greater risk of developing insulin resistance or insulin dysregulation. There are also certain breeds that are predisposed to these metabolic health concerns. And when you have too much starch and sugar in the grass, in an overconditioned animal that does have insulin resistance, you end up having the blood insulin being elevated because it's not being taken up into the cells properly. So essentially what happens is the horse consumes pasture, which has sugar in it, and that raises the blood glucose. When the blood glucose raises, the pancreas is then releasing insulin in response to that. For a horse that has insulin dysregulation or resistance, the insulin isn't working properly, essentially. So it's not allowing efficient uptake of glucose into the cells. And then because the glucose is remaining high, because it's not being cleared from the bloodstream properly, the pancreas then continues to secrete insulin. So that's what results in this elevated insulin we see in these metabolic animals. And when we have...
What is the worst case if I don't watch that? What's the worst case? What could my horse end up getting?
Laminitis is probably the big one, and it's devastating. It's horrible to see, horrible to deal with. It's very painful for the animal, and it's a long recovery. It takes a really long time to get that animal back to a healthy state. And every year, it tends to be the first week of June. I see many, many horses that can't walk because they're so laminitic. And every year it's the same. It's always that like first week roughly of June that I tend to get all the calls, and it's awful.
So listening to you and listening to me, I'm never going to put my horse out of the pasture. He's going to stay in the barn and he gets hay for the rest of the life. I don't want to stop riding, and I don't want to have all this problem. What is the real answer? Was I think you already mentioned in the beginning. You want to say it again?
Yeah, so the real answer is that we're introducing the horse to pasture slowly over multiple weeks and monitoring their body condition regularly. The one thing I will say, I will add about pasture is when the pasture is managed properly and we manage the horse going on pasture properly, pasture is great for horses. Nutritionally, when you have healthy pasture, it's fantastic. I would say particularly with vitamin E. There's been a lot of research coming out and more focus on vitamin E in the past few years. And if your horse is not on pasture at least 12 hours a day for 6 months out of the year, they are going to require supplemental vitamin E in their ration. And in addition to that, just because we're talking about muscle health, vitamin E is quite critical for muscle health. And horses tend to have a bit of an individual metabolism for vitamin E. And what that means is you can have 10 horses that say are all being fed the same, all being worked the same. And 4 of them might be deficient in vitamin E and 6 of them might be totally fine. So the other thing to consider is if your horse is not on that much pasture, which in most cases they are not consuming that much pasture, you should be testing their vitamin E at least once a year to evaluate their status, because that can be a limiting factor in muscle health and development. And it also is a major risk factor for multiple muscle disorders that we see in horses.
So the best way, so if I'm pretending I ride and I want to do this correctly, I would contact you and I would say, okay, I'm ready to a pasture. Here's my horse. You helped me in the fall. I'm very happy with the results right now. I would ask you, how long can I leave him now out on pasture? The grass is 4 to 6 inches. And how much should I feed him? What is your recommendation there when you come out to my horse?
So normally we start with 15-minute increments until you get up to about 4 hours of pasture, and then we increase in larger increments from then on. And it largely depends on the individual horse in terms of what the rest of their ration looks like. So for a horse that, say, is working regularly, maybe we have some fat added to their base ration, whether that is a fat fiber feed, whether it's an oil, any of those kind of powdered fat supplements as well. That I would say is the most common thing that we're taking out during the summer if the horse is going to be consuming pasture, just to decrease the calorie content of their supplemental ration a little bit to accommodate for that pasture being added to the ration.
So sorry to interrupt you there, because I want to help a little bit our viewer, and I'm really, it's super interested, and it's almost against my intuition. 50 minutes increments, because how good do we feel when we go out in the sun, right? So when I asked my host to come in, he says, no way, I just got out here. I feel great in the sun. I feel good. Good luck catching them, right? Because they feel like in heaven after they go the first time. I think that's the hardest time, right?
Oh, yeah, totally.
I'm listening to you and says, holy man, I really need to listen to Madeline. So sorry to interrupt you. Please continue. But this is I just wanted to share with you my feeling, and everybody who's watching us probably has the same feeling, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. And even
how do you answer then? How do you answer that?
Even with my own personal horse, they had their first day on pasture a couple of days ago, and so I did the 15 minutes. And yeah, getting them off the pasture is not easy. So make sure you keep halters on them. Yeah. And yeah, half of their 15 minutes, they just spent running around the pasture because they were so excited. So yeah, I do get the struggle. However, it just takes once to see a laminitic animal to realize how serious it really is. And if you've never dealt with that, you're very fortunate, because it's a devastating health issue that we see with equids.
Thank you so much for pointing this out. And I like to come in and say, hey, don't listen to her, because if your horse has changed muscle, and loses, then I have more work, and so if you're one of the people like what I just shared, oh, let's give it another half hour, let's give it another hour, oh, I forgot him, so what? He was happy, he was galloping around, all good and dandy. But what happens if I do that? Well, we heard just from Madeline how horrible the end result could be. But what about to the back? What I'm showing you here is not the end result. It starts there where they brace them, and then it goes to the next stage. You heard the term kissing spine very often, but same thing, when you sew in the neck, you're just miserable, right? And when I now carry something, my back is bracing, and when the back goes hollow, then we see how all these spines here, right, how they all touch. This is what's called kissing spine. Okay, so the spinal nerve gets inflamed, the multifidus muscle gets strained to the part where we have quite a bit of a disaster, and the horse gets heavy on the forehand. This is a video I like to share with all of you, is when a horse has a misfunctioned thoracic sling, and you can see how the therapist manipulates it, can only do it because it is so damaged the back. And just like you said, Madeline, how horrible it is to watch a horse with laminitis, and when they barely can put their foot on the ground, you start limping too, because you love your animal so much. And we don't show you all this because we want to shock you, but we want to say the horses are survival kings, and they will always adapt, and all what they do is eat and poop. We know that, right? So if we don't control it, then it leads to that. And many people say, well, in the wild, nobody controls it. But in the wild, do you really think they're sitting on luscious green and come from a very well-nutritioned winter? Mm-hmm. Right? So yeah, exactly. That there are certain different nutrients a wild horse takes in the fall versus in the spring. They go for certain bushes, certain shrubs, etc., and so on. That's, of course, your field. But when we have a captured animal, it is our duty to understand not just Saddlefit or nutrition, but how that fits together. So let me play this video here. It's very short, and she talks about how I find the difference between a forehand heavy horse or posture program.
Forehand heavy horse. Is it conformation or posture? Horses do not have a clavicle connecting their forelimbs to their body. Because it is only muscle and tissue that connect the forelimbs to the body, any downhill horse will be a posture. Here's an example of how the thoracic sling works to lift up the body. This sling is in failure, which is why it can be manually lifted to this degree. Watch again and notice the change between the lumbar and sacrum, the opening of the rib cage, the angle from the stifles to the elbows, and the lengthening of the neck. Here's an example of my own horse who has more subtle changes after some thoracic sling activation exercises. It's so important to understand the differences between conformation and posture. Because they both affect one another, you can make some real positive changes in your horse's body.
So that was drastic, huh? How the back went up and down through that.
Yeah, totally.
And this was just to show everybody, excuse me, to show everybody how much the back changes. And that's where you're sitting on. And your saddle will bridge. And then it's just a nasty downhill syndrome. So now what are you going to do when you have laminitis? You don't, most of the time, hopefully don't ride. So you're going to heal them. And if you're lucky, it doesn't take too long. Most of the time, sometimes they don't come back from it ever. They're always resilient. There's always other issues. And the longer you wait, the shittier will the saddle fit. So in the end, to summarize it up, I'm going to give it my very best shot. And then I'm going to hopefully help you to understand why we like to work together with other professionals, such as Madeline, is because our job as a saddle fitter, saddle maker, is heavy duty impact by how the horse's nutrition is. I always talk about the circle of influence. Nutrition is a massive factor. And you are so good. I mean, you're going in such a detail, and I had no idea what a vicious cycle that is with the pancreas, for example, you mentioned earlier. So one more time, check your saddle fit with the easy way. Put your saddle on where you normally put it on without saddle pad. Just lay it loose on top. Take a pencil, and where the horse's mane ends, most of the time, the end of the shoulder blade ends. So here's the mane, and the end of the shoulder blade is where the shoulder blade ends. So when you find that, grab the saddle, and every saddle has a D-ring, and line it up with the end of the mane. Let the saddle loose on it. Grab a pencil. Put your finger, your index, and your thumb at the end of the mane, and then run the pen back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It should go easy back and forth. If this started to pinch, something changed. Your saddle may be broken. Your horse may have lost weight. Your horse may have not maintained the muscle for whatever reason. But right now, it's a dangerous time. And right now, the word is one more time to you, Madeline, to say, in Colt's note for a 3-year-old or an adult amateur rider who loves horses, finally gets a horse, what am I supposed to do? Keep it very easy for me to understand.
In regards to like introducing to pasture?
Yeah.
Start with 15-minute increments over the course of a couple of weeks. Build your horse up until you hit that 4-hour mark. Once you're at the 4-hour mark, you can start increasing in larger increments, say of 30 to 60 minutes at a time, and monitor the body condition regularly. And if you notice changes, consult a professional. And
I think the one key, what shocked me earlier, was when I interrupted you so rudely. I said, wait. I'm happy that I finally could throw my horse on the pasture because I have no hay. You also mentioned you might want to maintain the hay, right? That was for me like,
yeah, totally. And like I said, where I live and where I have my horses, I don't have lush pasture. My pasture never reaches that 4 to 6 inches in length. So my horses are maintained on supplemental hay all summer as well. So don't be afraid to do it, because it's far better to have your horse maintain their condition than have this losing and gaining and losing and gaining as the pasture quality fluctuates.
Like I tell you right now, because I'm finished with building my barn, my first horses gets bought end of the year after almost 40 years without horses. But my grandchildren are old enough to get to the horse. They're nuts about all the pony toys I bought them, all the rocking horses. So it's time. So I know for a fact that I will have you come up, but if you can't come up, or listeners who live in Ontario area, you can't go, how can you help them?
So I do work virtually with horse owners all over the world. And what it comes down to is just lots of pictures of your pasture and of your horse. Some people will even take the video call in the barn and we'll talk about body condition scoring and evaluating your horse's top line. So there's lots of ways to do it. And yeah, if you're not local to Ontario, I do work virtually with horse owners globally.
Well, this was an absolutely fabulous time. I mean, I learned so much, like always.
I know I'm going to go check my horse's saddle this afternoon with a pen or a pencil before I get on her.
So it was great. And I hope people can see that we're trying to help here before the problem arises, because it's much easier to drink more water than constantly swallow pills when you have headaches. But we tend to do that, don't you think? We're a creature of, you know, this is more work. But I used an example. Most people are underhydrated and then complain about headaches. It's easier to go to the store and grab a box of Advil or Tylenol and eat those. But in reality, isn't. So it's the same thing with how easy it is to check the saddle with a pen. How easy is it to work with your virtual. So thank you very much. And I can't wait to work with you next time.
Yeah, it was a lovely conversation. Thank you.
Bye-bye.